In this video, we are going to learn from Capablanca how to play good chess, even if you are lazy, even if you don't want to spend so much time studying chess and memorizing openings. So this game is incredibly useful to learn from. So it is very important that you watch this entire game, because I think it is especially the end game that is most valuable to learn from. So let's get started. So Capablanca played this game, and in his usual style, he keeps the opening incredibly simple. He plays d4, develops the knight, the opponent also develops the knight, and then Capablanca is going to do something incredibly simple. He is going to build this pawn pyramid here in the center. And the opponent played pawn to c5 with plans of attacking our center. Capablanca just plays pawn to c3 to protect the center. And this is an incredibly simple opening that you can use, and it doesn't require you to memorize anything. It is just that we want to play for this setup with the pawn pyramid in the center. Then we want to develop our pieces, we want to castle, and we are basically just looking to get into the middle game as quickly as possible. So amazing opening strategy here, because it's just so simplistic and you cannot do anything wrong really. Black plays knight to c6, and multiple moves are good for white. Capablanca plays the move knight to d2, which is a very good move. Chess.com says this is a miss, and I know why, because this is very similar to the opening that I play with white. There is actually a better line here that Stockfish the engine was able to find, which is that as white, you should actually capture the pawn on c5, which looks strange, because black is going to try to win it back. But then you can try to hold on to it. Black can try to fight back. And here multiple things are possible, but basically if you keep playing all of the best moves as white, you are usually going to be up a pawn, but it's always quite difficult, and if black defends well, it can get very complicated. I always play this as white. I always go for this pawn on c5, and I try to hold on to it, because I have studied this with the engine. Of course, Capablanca had no idea that that was possible, so he just, or maybe he did, but he didn't play it. So he just tried to keep things very simple, which is what I recommend. Just knight to d2, bishop to d3, and we are just going to castle. And this is the setup that you can try to play as well if you don't want to spend too much time memorizing openings, just building the pawn pyramid and then going for this. This is known as the Collie system opening, or you might also look into the Pegasus system opening, which is my improved version of this Collie system. All right, so we just got through the opening phase. We are in the middle game, and Capablanca really had such a simple middle game strategy that we can learn so much from. And the middle game, we are going to see, it's going to be quite simple to understand and to replicate in your own games as well. And all we are trying to do is steer the game into a favorable endgame position, because this is what high level chess, or good chess I should say, is actually all about. We just want to steer the game into an endgame that is going to be winning for us. That is the plan. So here, white to play, of course, there are multiple moves that you can play. But I have noticed from many of Capablanca's games that he actually follows quite a simple framework, which is that first of all, if there are traits, Capablanca is going to trade. So pawn takes c5, bishop takes c5. And this might look strange, because you might think, why are we doing this? We are giving up our central pawn, we are moving their bishop, but this is actually a very smart move, because this bishop was more useful on this diagonal than it is on this diagonal. It's actually quite useless here, and white could even play pawn to b4, just win a tempo against the bishop, and then play bishop to b2, which is probably what I would play here. I have played similar positions like this many times. There is a second strategy here that you can follow, and this is a very simple one. When you play this opening, or in general, when you play a d4 opening, meaning you start by putting your pawn on d4, your middle game strategy should be to try to push the other pawn to e4, as quickly as possible. So that is just a simple middle game plan you can follow. When you start with d4, you try to push pawn to e4. And when you have started your game with e4, which is also possible, you should try to push your second pawn to d4 in the middle game. So here, that is what Capablanca does. He plays pawn to e4, which can lead to trading. Black could always capture this. And this opens up their queen against our bishop, but white has the simple move bishop takes e4, knight takes e4, excuse me, knight takes e4, hitting the bishop, hitting the knight, and in case of trading, we just simply get this bishop to a very good diagonal, a very central square, and as you might also notice, we are starting to build up some type of attack towards the enemy king. There might even be a Greek gift that could be possible, which is a tactic that we might be able to use. We are going to look into that in a moment. Maybe black trades, but in any case, this is definitely a favorable position to have as white for the endgame, because we have the rook on the open file, we have the better developed pieces, and we are going to have a pleasant position from here. So because of all of those reasons, black didn't take in the center. Instead, they played the bishop back to e7. All right. And there are multiple things that we can do here, but as white, we are not really in a rush to do anything. Because taking in the center ourselves would actually be bad, because we would be allowing our opponent to centralize their knight, and we don't really achieve anything. I even think we are losing some control of the center. So Capablanca plays queen to e2, and e2 is a very good square for the queen. This is really something that you should try to remember. And all of these openings, e2 is usually the best square for your queen, because it's working on the e file. It still has the opportunity to go to the king side, plus it's also influencing the queen side. So e2 is a very good square. Black sees that the queen is on the e file, so they put a rook on the same file, which in general is a good strategy, because of course things might also always open up. And then at some point, there might be like a bishop move. I will actually show, for example, here. There might be like a bishop move, and then at the same time, there is a discovery against the queen. So rook to e8 is a very sensible move. And here, Capablanca is going to continue with a very simple middle game that you can use in your games as well, which is to first play d4, later play e4, and if we get the opportunity to play e5, we should play it. Because e5 is a good move, forces the knight to step away from the defense of the king side, which is important. This pawn was just weakened. There might be a sacrifice or an attack there in the future. And this pawn is also gaining space, basically attacking important squares into the enemy's position. So this is a great move. Here, Capablanca played the move knight to b3. The engine Stockfish doesn't fully agree that this is the best move. I think it's a very logical move, because playing this basically just opens up the bishop, and black is not going to play this. Black is not going to play bishop. At least I don't think so. They might try it, but they won't play it probably. But I just wanted to show here that the move knight b3 that Capablanca played had a big reason behind it. It's opening up the bishop, but it's also potentially opening up this. Bishop takes h7, knight g5 with a check, queen h5, and then we are threatening to do checkmate, and the only thing black can do is give up the queen. And if the king steps forward instead, there is queen to d3 with a check, and this is also going to be completely winning for white. This is what I was talking about with the Greek gift sacrifice that Capablanca is setting up here. And this sacrifice is a very important one to keep in mind, especially if you want to try out playing a game like this, because this is one of the best tactics available in this position. So that's why they played knight to b3. The opponent actually played a pretty amazing move here, pawn to f6. And pawn to f6 is great for multiple reasons. First of all, it challenges the center. There are now 3 attackers on that central pawn, and that central pawn is one of the biggest assets that we have, one of the biggest advantages that we have. It also helps support the g5 square, and it also gives the king a square in case something ever happens and the king needs to move. So it's actually a good move. So our pawn is attacked 3 times. It's only protected 2 times, so Capablanca just simply plays bishop to f4, protecting the pawn. And basically, what Capablanca is doing here is offering a bunch of tricks. Pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn, knight takes knight, bishop takes knight, knight takes bishop, queen takes knight, a huge trade. Why did Capablanca go for this? Well, as I said, his playstyle is always like this. Just keep the opening simple. We can trade if we can. We can try to set up a trick like we did, but they didn't fall for it. And all we are going to do is to try to get an advantageous endgame. And this is where the game starts to get really interesting, because here you are going to see how you can turn this middle game into a guaranteed win in the endgame. So I think the reason that Capablanca went for this is because this structure is superior for white. Why is that? All because of pawn islands. You need to understand this. So white only has 2 pawn islands. And I consider this a pawn island on the right and one on the left. And these are islands because those pawns are connected to each other. Black, on the other hand, has 3 pawn islands. And the player with the most pawn islands is always going to be the player that will struggle the most in the endgame to keep everything safe. And also, they have this pawn which we might try to build up pressure against. So we are going to try to squeeze a win from this endgame. Black, however, played a very good move. They played bishop to f6, attacking the queen. Queen goes back to that very important e2 square. And then black plays pawn e5, which is actually smart, because that pawn on e6 was blocking in some of black's pieces, and it might also be a target for attack. It's actually better placed here on the e5 square, and there might also be a push to e4 potentially in the future. Here, Capablanca plays a very smart move. Rook to d1. All right. Rook to the d file. Basically doing something that black also did earlier in the game. When there is a file and there is a queen on the file, it's always smart to put your rook there, because there might be tactics in the future. So that is the strategy here. And I think here, this is actually the first weak move that black played during the entire game. a6 doesn't really do much. Maybe they want to play b5 and bishop b7, although that even gives away a square to the knight. So yeah, a6 is the first move that black played, which didn't really help much for this position. And if you want, you can pause this here and try to solve this as a puzzle. There is actually a way for white to win material. There is a way for white to win a pawn. So Capablanca played the move bishop to c4. Incredibly interesting move. If you were thinking maybe bishop to e4, that also works. Bishop to e4 also works. The only difference is there they can push the pawn, and it gets a little bit more complicated. But Capablanca plays bishop to c4. And what this says is, hey, look, I am attacking your pawn twice. I'm going to try to win it. You cannot push it because it's pinned to the king. So you need to do something to protect your pawn, right? Otherwise you are going to lose your pawn. So they play bishop to e6, protecting the pawn. And it looks like our attack just completely failed and we didn't achieve anything. But that is not true. There is a brilliant move in this position that we can play. Capablanca played bishop takes d5. Brilliant move. Taking that pawn anyways, even though it is protected right here. Might sound crazy because bishop takes d5, but we have the simple move here, pawn to c4. Look. The rook on the file of the queen, as we talked about, is important, because now that bishop is pinned. Black moved rook to c8, and then here we can take that bishop, centralize the rook, also attack the queen, plus this also keeps our pawn islands closer together, because this might in the future still connect and support each other. So this doesn't mess up the pawn islands. So I think this is a very safe way to play it. Black plays queen to b6. Okay, all right, nothing special. White plays, Capablanca plays rook to c1 to protect the pawn one more time. I think that's also fine. And black plays the very good move here, pawn to e4, which actually opens up the bishop. And this bishop is going to be a very strong piece in this endgame. So black was actually defending pretty well here, because even though Capablanca is up a pawn, it's still not easy. Whenever you have a a pawn like this, one of the best things you can do is try to push it, which is what Capablanca plays. Push the pawn, attack the queen, which basically means that we are guaranteed that this is a free move, and the pawn is closer to promotion, and it's also helping to support this square on d6. So there might even be a move like rook to d6 there in the future. Okay, Capablanca says, okay, we have the open file. Let's just double up my rooks here. Very simple chess, nothing complicated going on. Black plays rook c7. I'm not entirely sure what's going on with that. Not doing that much. And Capablanca plays rook to d6. Again, Stockfish says it's a miss. I think it's very logical. Basically, we are using the pawn as a support point for the rook, so we can attack the queen. The best move apparently was knight a5, but try to explain to anyone why this is incredibly good. Not going to be very easy. Sometimes the engine sees lines that humans just wouldn't find. Queen to e5, and this endgame is so instructive just because it's so incredibly simple. We just try to have less pawn islands, that's step number 1. Then we try to win a pawn, step number 2. Then we try to push that pawn, that was step number 3, which is what we did. And now all we want to do is try to trade some pieces and see if we can get a position where maybe we can try to promote that pawn, or maybe even win another pawn. We also took the open file and we doubled up rooks on the open file. So all that's left once you have doubled rooks is to infiltrate on the 7th rank. That's very important in the endgame. Always put your rook on the 7th rank if you can. We have some trades going, but this rook is of course an incredibly good piece, attacking this pawn, attacking the pawn in front of the king as well. So we might be getting some tricks here. Black played queen to f5, which is an interesting move because they are basically saying, look, if you want, you can have this pawn. And it's a bit of a poison pawn, actually. You don't really want to take this because white is actually potentially in some trouble. Black plays the move pawn to e3. And it's not always so simple. If you take this, for example, the queen gives a check on the back rank. And we might be getting in trouble, like the rook, the bishop, the queen swarming our king. We might be getting in trouble. Maybe we will just get a repetition of moves. Or if we are not careful, we might get back rank checked. We might be running into some tactics. So it's not very clear if you take this pawn how you are going to win the game. So instead, it's better to keep things simple. Capablanca noticed that this rook is a very good attacking piece, but it's not going to be able to do much by itself. So we need to get more pieces into the game. Queen to c4, check to the king, and the king has to move. There's pretty much only one move, right? King h8, because if the king goes here, that's just a very simple checkmate already. Capablanca says, what's better than having one piece on the 7th rank? Well, having 2 pieces on the 7th rank. Let's put the queen there. Again, Stockfish always sees better lines, but I think this is very simple chess. We just put the 2 pieces on the 7th rank, which is putting a lot of pressure on the black position. I think it's very hard to defend this as black, because your rook is hanging, your pawn is hanging, you also need to watch out for g7, you also need to watch out for back rank mate potentially. So there are barely any moves to keep black into the game. Black played the move queen e5, which is actually very impressive. It's the best move because it fixes almost everything at the same time. It protects the rook, protects the bishop, helps the bishop protect the pawn, and it's like everything is suddenly connected. And yes, we still have that free pawn, but it's still poison. We still cannot capture it, because if we capture it, black plays pawn to e3, and suddenly we are in trouble, because white doesn't really have any way to make a breakthrough. This pawn is 2 squares away from promotion. We have back rank issues. If we take this, we run into check, and then eventually we get mated, and if we go here, we also get mated. So still, this pawn was hanging almost the entire game. It's not a free pawn. We cannot just take this. And I think here we see a beautiful display of piece coordination. Capablanca playing rook to d5 attacks the queen, and there's only one move to keep black into the game, which is queen b8. Hard to find. You don't really want to play it, but again, it's logical because it protects the pawn and the rook, so it kind of fixes all problems. I think black was just tired of being harassed all the time and said, look, we are just going to trade queens. And Capablanca said, yeah, sure, let's trade queens because I have just a simple winning endgame here. Because all we wanted to do was that we wanted to be up one pawn, which is what we did. We wanted to get it close to promotion, and now all that's left to do is to win this one, to win this pawn on b7. And once we do that, we are going to be able to promote. So very simple, rook to d7. The pawn is under attack. If the pawn moves forward, that's not really helping because this is still a passed pawn, meaning now the pawn can start pushing, well, not immediately, but in the future, we are going to be able to push the pawn, let's say knight a5, and then the pawn is going to simply push to promotion. And that is the entire way that Capablanca plays his games. Keep it simple, try to win a pawn, and then just try to promote it. So we will be going a little bit more quickly for the rest of the game. Basically, Capablanca picks up the pawn, they pick up a pawn that's actually not that relevant. And then Capablanca just says, hey, look, you can trade rooks with me. And if you trade rooks, you are also just bringing me one square closer to promotion. You can try to block it, but it's never really going to work because eventually the knight is going to jump to a square where it protects promotion. I'm going to push, and that will be ugly. That will just be game over. So black cannot trade, meaning white wins yet another pawn. The game could have even been over more quickly, but you can simply see we created that pawn in the beginning and we are just pushing it now. Capablanca didn't really do anything spectacular except just creating that passed pawn and then pushing it all of the way. When you are pushing a pawn, you always want to have your rook behind it, not in front of it. So yeah, Capablanca just takes the time. Rook a4, rook c4. Let's just put the rook behind it, which means we can start pushing in the future and then just promote. Black is still trying this e3 tricks, and we still need to watch out that we don't get back rank mated. So Capablanca trades, moves the king, and this basically solves any problems of potentially running into back rank checkmate. We cannot push the passed pawn, which is sad. We might be able to like activate the knight in a way. Imagine if we could get a knight to d5, that would be nice. But Capablanca says, you know what? We actually have a second pawn as well. Let's just push that one. a4, a5. The bishop is running out of moves. You could even play a6, and you just keep pushing the pawns. That's a very simple strategy you can use. Capablanca didn't even push the pawns here. He just said, look, I'm going to get my king closer as well. See if I can help with my king. Check with the knight. We have some trades, and we are just bringing the king closer to the action, which is also a great way to play in the endgame. In the endgame, you basically want to have your king in the center as quickly as possible. This position is completely winning for white. You can try to pause and see if you can find a good move, because it looks like black is going to be winning that pawn. But of course, the beauty is we have two passed pawns right now, and yeah, they can never stop both of them. Maybe they can take this one, we can trade, and we are not promoting, but the pawn is good enough to win us the endgame, because black always has to stay close, which means that we can just go and grab those pawns. And the game ended here. Black resigned, simply because if black goes to pick up the pawn, we can go pick up these pawns, and they will always be too slow. They cannot really do anything, like the pawn is always going to drop, and then white is just simply up two pawns, going to promote and win the endgame.